Hello, BookTube. Well, welcome back to another Middlemarch meditation. I think we're on the sixth video now. It amazes me, and can I just say thanks a lot for the number of people that are viewing these. I never thought they'd really get, I didn't think they'd get the audience numbers. I don't get audience numbers yet, not in any real way. I'm still very, very small as a channel, but that's why it's so amazing when people discover you and you find that they're watching and following along. Today we are going to finish chapter 2, so we're going to go pages 21, 22, and then what's left on page 23 to finish the chapter. And the theme, I think, I didn't put a lot of notes. You'll see when I put the pages up on screen in a second. I don't have a lot of notes, and that's because there weren't a lot of things to look up or double check. Mostly I felt that the last few pages of the chapter were focusing on unspoken thoughts, which is such it's a device that we don't even think about in fiction, but we are aware of. We know it happens. We just don't talk about it a great deal, about how much fictional drama comes from characters thinking something that they never say, particularly if it means an answer to a question, or answering their own questions rather than asking them of the people that might be able to give them the right answers. So many misunderstandings and difficulties that come. And I suppose that's just to illustrate that human life is like that. We don't say the things that probably if we did say, at least people would know where they stood and what we were expecting. But of course, there are always reasons why people keep their thoughts unspoken. And that's what I want to look at is for the four characters, because we know in chapter 2, you've got Celia, Dorothea, Edward Casaubon, I was going to call him Edmund, Edward Casaubon, and Sir James Chettam. Mr. Brooke, Arthur Brooke, the uncle, we've talked about him previously. He doesn't appear to consider the reasons why they haven't said their thoughts, and just considers some errors in their thinking that they're going to cause problems later on in the book. So we might as well get page 21 onto here. Let's see if I can get it to show for you. Just move to top. There we go. And of course it begins with a significant sentence, doesn't it? Celia thought privately, comma. So here's the whole problem, is all these private thoughts. And we'll start with Celia. So, we want to know, we wish she would speak her mind, because, Celia actually thinks Dorothea quite despises Sir James Chettam. Now, she seems to be the only person. Celia seems to understand the situation well, and she said Celia felt that this was a pity if he was despised. She had never been deceived, and I think this is something to note. We'll come back to this at the end of the video. Celia seems to be the one person who doesn't operate with a high degree of self-deception. She's the character who seems to understand herself well, and maybe that is why she is always considered sensible compared to her sister. So it says, sometimes indeed she had reflected that Dodo would perhaps not make a husband happy who had not her way of looking at things. And then it says she stifled in the depths of her heart, was the feeling that her sister was too religious for her family comfort. Notions and scruples were like split needles. Now, modern needles don't split, but perhaps this was something that happened in the 19th century, depending on how needles were made, which would be terrifying, because there was a lot of hand sewing done. So if there was such a thing as a split needle, and then that could start falling into, as you say, furniture or upholstery, you can see what the metaphor is perfect. They're like, or simile rather, like split needles, making one afraid of treading or sitting down or even eating. That's, yeah. But or, as I've added here in my notes, or speaking honestly. That is to say, when you have someone with really stringent religious scruples, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to live around them, even to do ordinary things around them for fear of offending, and it can be difficult to speak your own mind honestly, especially if you know that's just going to cause conflict. And I think that's what Celia is doing. There could be many reasons why she's not speaking her thoughts. She does seem to recognize, if we think of the jewelry incident, she does seem to recognize that she is the younger, and therefore somehow her prerogative to speak, maybe it waits on something else, but at any rate, she mustn't. It feels like she's holding back what she really wants, because because of her position within the family, that she recognizes the pecking order, and she knows that her particular position means she can't always speak. But she's probably worried. I would think she'd be worried about upsetting Dorothea, because, we were to skip forward to page 24, where we notice that Celia has decided to spend her time entertaining some small children in the parish because she can't spend time enjoyably with Dorothy. It just shows that she doesn't really have anyone else her own age to spend time with, and that's unfortunate. It means that if she were to lose Dorothy as a friend, she would be very lonely. And of course, we don't know what Celia's feelings are about these suitors. The narrator doesn't delve into that yet, but I'm just wondering, and I'm going to go on to the next paragraph. I'm going to talk about Sir James, because he is so interesting. His whole frame of mind, his whole view of himself. Let's see if I can enlarge the type here. Yeah, here we go. So, when Miss Brooke was at the tea table, Sir James came to sit down by her, not having felt her mode of answering him at all offensive, which she really isn't paying attention to him. But he asked, I presume this is him asking himself, why should he suspect this? And then he answered the question. He thought it probable that Miss Brooke liked him. Well, okay, so I don't know on what basis. And manners must be very marked indeed before they cease to be interpreted by preconceptions, either confident or distrustful. I feel that's Eliot saying that when you've got a preconception about somebody, it takes a lot of the opposite behavior to finally convince you. And that's true, isn't it? If we believe somebody is bad, it takes a lot of good behavior for them to dig themselves out of their bad reputation in our minds. And similarly, if somebody has a good reputation, we hang on to our trust for them sometimes longer than is good. But in this case, it's a very straight. He's obviously just come to the situation thinking, she'll like me. Won't be a problem. And he says this. She was thoroughly charming to him, but of course he theorized a little about his attachment. And here's his theory. Here's why he feels he's so obviously attractive. He was made of excellent human dough. And I just thought, oh my goodness. When you consider, why do authors pick particular words? She could have chosen excellent human pedigree, excellent human metal, I don't know, excellent human breeding. I mean, the Victorians were obsessed with that. So, but she chose dough, which of course is half of Dodo, which is Dorothea's nickname. I don't know if that means anything or not, but I just thought it was interesting. So he's excellent human dough. But of course that just made me think of something sort of heavy and shapeless and useful, but only in a limited way. Dough is, you could do one thing with dough. You can make bread out of it, or you can let it go hard and stale and useless. But of course, that's exactly what it would be. But it didn't bring pleasant connotations to my mind. I didn't think, excellent human dough, cool. It just made me think of how, I suppose, particularly if you're Caucasian like me, we all kind of look like uncooked bread dough, don't we? And I thought, yeah, and it's yeah. It's maybe not as attractive as we think sometimes, but yeah, I thought, yeah, we all kind of look like lumps of dough that really could use an oven to make us look more appetizing. But he said, had the rare merit of knowing that his talents, even if let loose, would not set the smallest stream in the country on fire. So, I don't know where he gets the idea that he's excellent human dough when he goes on to say he doesn't really have an outstanding ability to his name. And it said, so he liked the prospect of a wife to whom he could say, what shall we do about this or that, who could help her husband out with reasons, and would also have the property qualifications for doing so. And that's really interesting. Think back to Dorothea's, her assessment of what a good husband would be. I mean, she said, this was back on I am keeping some notes still, guys. I'm so sorry. I tried going completely unscripted, but if you knew my memory, you'd understand. You're getting way more because I've taken some notes. So if we go back to page 10, Dorothea says to herself, I suppose it's a thought of hers, the really delightful marriage must be that where your husband was a sort of father and could teach you even Hebrew if you wished it. Now, it seems to me that what Sir James really wants is a kind of mother. So it's as if both Dorothea and Sir James are looking, when they're looking for a partner, what they're really looking for is some kind of stand-in parent. And you can kind of understand it in Dorothea's case because she is an orphan. She did lose her father and her mother quite young, and that can make you sometimes, in certain situations, look for father and mother substitutes. And that might be subconsciously. You might not be conscious of the fact that that's what you're doing when you're seeking out a partner. But let's go back to Sir James, because there is something else about his sort of assured manner that is making me think of The Mill on the Floss, and I'll tell you why. If you have a copy of The Mill on the Floss, I was trying to now I've quoted a page number, and I thought, Heather, you need to tell people what edition. It's in the other room. So would you bear with me, please? I am going to stop recording just so I can get the book. Bear with. Okay, I'm back, and I'm going to cover my face because who needs to see that, right? This is my copy of The Mill on the Floss. So it is the Oxford University Press edition. This edition, Oxford World Classics, and this is from 2015, this particular edition. So this is what I did my you see why I don't use this camera very much. I'm just really not very good at it. So this is what I used when I had to write a university assignment, so it's got a couple of bookmarks in it. But I am going to go to page 342. If you have some other edition of The Mill on the Floss, then I would go to the book the sixth, which is The Great Temptation, and I would go to the first chapter of The Great Temptation, and I'm going to try and get there eventually. Where is it now? 342. So you're going to go to the end of chapter 1 of The Great Temptation, the very final page, and then I think you're just going to have to feel your way to where this passage is. But I'm going to read here. So it starts with, was not Stephen Guest right in his decided opinion that this slim maiden of 18, he's talking, of course, about Lucy, this slim maiden of 18 was quite the sort of wife a man would not be likely to repent of marrying? I just thought that was really weird. I remember pulling back at the time and going, well, I think you should probably like her as well. But I thought, oh, the 19th century, they did things differently. I mean, me insisting on all this romance. But I'm trying to think that he meant to choose Lucy. This is how she was a little darling and exactly the sort of woman he had always most admired, not loved. There was no sense of passion here. Just kind of, he was conscious of the excellent judgment in preferring her. So you almost wonder, when Stephen Guest chose Lucy as a wife, did he do it more because he was just so pleased with himself for being able to spot what looked like a very acceptable, capable wife type? Was he just thrilled because he'd done that, rather than going, well, do I actually want to live with this kind of woman? But just was so pleased with himself. And it seems to me that Sir James, he's kind of doing the same thing with Dorothea. He's checking her out and he's going, oh, she just seems like just the right type for me. This is just what I want. I want a very clever woman who can he could ask questions of, and she would have an opinion and want to say something. And so it says, in short, he felt himself to be in love in the right place. Like it's something. Both Stephen Guest and James Chettam use the word love as if they mean preference. Not passion, but preference. So he felt himself to put his preference in the right place. And he was ready to endure a great deal of predominance. That is, he was going to allow Dorothea to, predominate in the relationship, because he says, well, after all, a man could always put that down when he liked. Yeah, he certainly could. Sir James had no idea that he should ever like to put down the predominance of this handsome girl in whose cleverness he delighted. Why not? A man's mind, what there is of it. Oh, now who is that speaking? I don't think that's James. I think we might be hearing the author there, but I speculate. Don't take that on authority. But I love that. A man's mind, what there is of it, has always the advantage of being masculine. Well, yes, it does. Yes, it does. As the smallest birch tree is of a higher kind than the most soaring palm. You can feel the pins going into the voodoo doll, can't you? She says this is just really, really sharp satire. But poor Elliot. Maybe she met a number of men whose minds didn't deserve the capacity of masculinity. I don't know. I do know some. I think we all meet men like that, including other men. Just know. But at any rate, so James might not have originated this estimate. No, he certainly didn't. But kind Providence furnishes the limpest personality with a little gum or starch in the form of tradition. So in other words, tradition was enough, not that Sir James had ever properly assessed his abilities, but he's just sort of saying, well, but tradition told him, you'll be better just by having been born a boy. Anyway, poor Sir James, he tries to re-engage Dorothea in this conversation about horse riding, which you do think is truly flogging a dead horse. I don't know if anybody was thinking of that when they were reading it, because of course she does the same thing. She tries to defer the conversation. And now I suppose it's time to talk about Dorothea, because we're going to go on to page 22, and we've talked about this idea that she has about an ideal husband. So I'm going to load we'll take page 21 off, and we'll put page 22 on so that we can go straight on to there. And move that up so we can see. Okay, and of course he tries to compliment her. It's just it's painful if you were in the room for this conversation, especially if you'd been a guest and you'd already heard Sir James desperately trying to talk horse riding with her. You would know that this was wearing thin. But he's still trying to keep it going, and he doesn't stop really until Mr. Casaubon approaches the table with his teacup, because he'd been listening. It says, and was listening. And it's interesting too, it doesn't say why he's listening or what his motives are yet, but I'm sure we'll get to those. Maybe he reveals it a little bit here. This is interesting. Yeah, this is interesting. So he says, we must not inquire too curiously into motives. And then I'm going to skip that. Miss Brooke knows that that is motives, are apt to become feeble in the utterance. The aroma is mixed with the grosser air. And then he finishes his paragraph by saying we must keep the germinating grain away from the light, which is actually a disturbing motto, because one thinks of Dorothea and her sisters because they're young women, as being germinating grain. And you worry about this phrase. I mean, Dorothea colors with pleasure and looks up gratefully at him, and you think, because you can imagine a man who thinks that uttering your motives is a stupid thing to do is basically saying it's better to keep all of your thoughts unspoken and shut up. And maybe he's saying it particularly, you germinating grains, we don't want you having opinions. We'll soon put that down. I don't know. I didn't like that. As I was listening to the phrase, I thought, oh my God, if she does marry him, she's in for a heap of trouble. But of course she doesn't know. Now she's so excited. And what does she say of him? She says, here was a man who could understand the higher inward life, and with whom there could be some spiritual communion, nay, who could illuminate principle with the widest knowledge, a man whose learning almost amounted to a proof of whatever he believed. Well, that's just absolutely, possibly the most dangerous. But, you can tell that yourself. You don't really need me to say it. I think what's lovely is how, Elliot chimes in here, and she says, now, Dorothea's inferences may seem large. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much heading into divinity territory with her opinions of the Reverend. It says, but life could never have gone on at any period but for this liberal allowance of conclusion, which has facilitated marriage under the difficulties of civilization. So her sarcasm is so sharp, meaning, well, we have to put up with this business of people over or underestimating each other on acquaintance, because we'd never marry anybody we'd never marry anybody if we truly understood who we were dealing with, and they wouldn't marry us maybe either. That's probably true. But I just love this last sentence. Has anyone ever pinched into its pilulous, meaning like a pill, its pilulous smallness, the cobweb of pre-matrimonial acquaintanceship? I thought, yeah. It's funny, but if I'd have read this book when I was young, I don't know what I'd have made of that sentence now. You look back on it and you go, oh, because you think of marriages that relationships that about, some that worked, but more often many didn't, and you could never predict the ones that will and the ones that won't. It's never that simple. Sometimes you can predict the ones that won't, because some of them start out so disastrously you think, oh my God. But some of them look like they'll be okay, and you're always a bit surprised when they go too. But it must be the result of this pilulous smallness of pre-matrimonial acquaintanceship that we enter into this incredible thing called a long-term relationship, hardly knowing, who we are, never mind who our partner is. I'm going to go on now to the next page, because we end, Sir James, he says, oh yes, Miss Brooke shall not be urged to tell reasons, and it goes on to say that Sir James wasn't the least bit jealous of the interest which Dorothea, had looked up at Mr. Casaubon. It just never occurred to him that a girl would choose Casaubon over himself. And in a way, it wouldn't probably occur to us either. Sadly, it's just, interesting that knowing what we do about Dorothy, we know that this could be a problem. But I'm going to go on to the last page now. Okay. And Sir James calls Edward Casaubon a dried bookworm. And I'm just interested because he uses the word worm here, and the word worm is also used in the last sentence, but we'll get to that. Because, of course, I'm going to go to the last paragraph and said, however, since Miss Brooke had become engaged in a conversation with Mr. Casaubon about the Vaudois clergy, and I'm wondering, actually, if that has any reference. I should have looked that up, whether Vaudois clergy would be any reference to 16th century, 17th century French. Maybe. I'll look that up, reader, and I promise I will come back at the next video and comment on it. And I say that, and it's terrible. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, Sir James betook himself to Celia and talked to her about her sister. Of course he did. Spoke of a house in town and asked whether Miss Brooke disliked London. Away from her sister, Celia talked quite easily, and Sir James said to himself, again unspoken thoughts, that the second Miss Brooke was certainly very agreeable as well as pretty, though not, he said, as some people pretended, more clever and sensible than the elder sister. I'm not sure why he was so convinced that these rumors about her sensibleness might not be true. He felt that he had chosen the one who was in all respects the superior. That is, he felt Dorothea was better. And I just thought it was so strange, because only Celia right now seems to be behaving as her honest self. She is keeping thoughts to herself, but truly she is behaving as she is, and there's no disguising anything. She just seemed very straightforward. And she also is the only one that seems to have clarity of perspective. And yet, because she's young, she doesn't get to show. Because she's young, she's probably not showing Sir James how capable she is. She doesn't show opinions. And of course, that's what he's looking for. He thinks an opinionated woman is what he needs. He needs someone very clever and opinionated to sort of boss him around. Because Celia doesn't do that, because she holds back, even though she might have very sensible opinions. He's not convinced that she's the superior. Wow, I don't know if she's superior. I think the two girls they're both very intelligent. I don't know where Celia gets her naturalness from. Perhaps it's just because she knows she's the youngest, and when you don't have power can't distort your perception of yourself. I don't know. That's me just theorizing. I like this last sentence where Sir James says to himself he would be the very MawWorm of bachelors who pretended not to expect it, that is, expect to look forward to having the best. And this MawWorm is interesting. Yes, it means mealworm, and if you feed birds, you know what mealworms are. Or if you go fishing, I think you know what mealworms are. But that's not the point. MawWorm is the name of a character in a 17th century English play called The Hypocrite, and I will put a link to that play in the description box. It was written by Sir Isaac Bickerstaff, and that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that play, if you know Molière and have read or watched Tartuffe, if you read The Hypocrite, you will know that it is based and drawn from and using the story of Tartuffe to write another very, very, very similar story. If it were done now in the 21st century, if Molière had written Tartuffe in the 20th or 21st century and Sir Isaac Bickerstaff had written The Hypocrite around the same time, Molière would sue for copyright infringement because that's how close the two plays are. You could tell. Even sometimes the very characters' lines, they're not word for word the same, but I've read a couple of English translations of Molière, and they're awfully close. They're uncomfortably close. If the law were to, if the law had been different at the time, but it wasn't. You could do what you liked in the 17th century. You could copy a play story and do what you wanted with it. That was absolutely fine. But MawWorm is interesting because in Molière's Tartuffe, there isn't really an equivalent character to the character of MawWorm who appears in Isaac Bickerstaff's play. Bickerstaff seems to have invented him as one of those. Now I'm having to, refer to some other pieces. Shakespearean comedic actors. In Much Ado About Nothing, the constables. Think of something like that. I'm trying to think of the name of the. Oh God, what was the name of the constable in Much Ado About Nothing? It's not going to come to me. Who's just so damn funny. But MawWorm was the same kind of character. He was a bit extreme, bit stupid, and very opinionated, and I can see why to call yourself the MawWorm of bachelors means that instead of working for that's right, MawWorm, instead of working for his best interest, the harder he seemed to try to work in what he thought was his best interest, the more he was actually doing stuff that wasn't in his best interest. That's how dumb he was. Of course, the weird thing is that's exactly what James Chatham is doing. James Chatham is a MawWorm. He thinks he isn't, but I think at least in the short term, I think in the next few chapters, we're going to find that he is one. So that's really it now for chapter 2. So where are we now if you're following my other videos? I am 55% of the way through June. I am very close to finishing the nonfiction work that I'm reading right now. So that means that we're going to be a bit out of sequence because normally it would be time for a fiction review. But I'm not finished June. I have begun another very skinny little novel, which I'll go into more detail later, that I might finish ahead of June, and I'm doing that kind of as an insurance policy because I don't want to. I like releasing videos about as often as I'm doing, which seems to be about twice per week, and I'd like to keep doing that if I can. So if I don't, I'm still thinking it'll be a while before I finish June because I'm going to be a bit busy this weekend. I'm not going to get quite as much reading. Well, no, I can see some opportunities for reading June because that's on my phone, on my Kindle app. So I might be able to get a bit more reading done there. But probably the next thing you're going to see being recorded will be a nonfiction review. So look out for that. I'd say look out for that sort of midweek next week. Or midweek this week, sorry. I'm just like, I got to be careful. I do record these ahead of time, as you're probably going to now guess, because I've let that cat out of the bag. But every YouTuber does that, don't they? I just record ahead of time, and then, I know that on a day when I'm busy, a video is still going to come out for everybody. So anyway, thanks very much for joining me today, and look forward to talking to you about Middlemarch again sometime soon. Take care. Bye-bye.